Hi, welcome back. You're watching The Nation exclusively on Bernama TV. Now, joining me in studio is KORBOUT, the Sport Procurement Manager at Basementality Sendirian Berhad, and he's here with us to share his insights on Malaysia's role in Asia's growing semiconductor landscape and whether we have what it takes to lead the charge. Now, KIRILL, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's jump straight into the conversation, right? So Malaysia has long played a back role. When we're talking about the global semiconductor supply chain, we've been involved in testing, assembly, packaging. What does it really take for Malaysia to now move up that value chain? If we're talking about going into design and innovation and also, taking on higher value roles.
Yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, thanks for having me. You see, Malaysia has had a very central role throughout the years in the business, right. And the central location of Malaysia is one of the beneficial factors for this country, right? So, however, we cannot always just rely on the legacy reputation from the past, because we see a lot of competitiveness from the ASEAN region at the moment. We see Vietnam, they're really gearing up their manufacturing. Thailand, they're also making strategic alliances. As you can see in the summit as well, there are other players that are very aggressive. Singapore has been the dominant R&D center and the design center in the region. Right. And you have to look back and see, how is Malaysia going to differentiate itself? What's going to be, are we competing on the same terms, or are we trying to be different? When we're saying that, this is not like a party, that ASEAN comes together and we're all going to play along. Like some of the ministers were saying, like, at the end of the day, we have to take our national interest as a first priority. So therefore, you see, everyone's actually competing, but we say, how can we compete together? But we should not outcompete each other. So Malaysia has to pick a lane. How are we going to differentiate ourselves? How are we going to do things better than the other countries that are surrounding us? And using the kind of the legacy past or the history that we've had in this field, how do we move forward? To me, it all boils down to one simple thing: talent. If you have companies here in Malaysia that are investing in the country, they are opening up plants, they're officiating the plants as we speak, but where do they come from? It is R&D centers in other countries, for example, and they only do packaging, assembly, and all that in, let's say, Penang. And then they ship it out to somewhere else. That means they get tax-free cuts, and that's about it. So how are we going to involve the Malaysian industry in terms of talent, where we can design, we can do the R&D, we can have our own companies that do this. So it comes down to the agenda. What kind of framework does the government actually want to put forth for the next coming, let's say, 5 to 10 to maybe 15 years? Because it starts at the end of the day from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, which produces students that then go into these university institutions, then jump over into the industry, academia, and then work together in an ecosystem that then makes the industry thrive. And so far we can see that it's a challenging situation now, because there's a lot of uncertainty. So for Malaysia to stand out, I think we really have to choose the path forward.
KIRILL, now let's try and get a different perspective, on Malaysia's role in the semiconductor industry. And we did earlier speak to Dr. Carl Lee Chi Leong, who's a senior lecturer at the Institute of China Studies from University of Malaya. And we asked him how he would describe Malaysia's current standing in the global semiconductor supply chain. Now, this is his response.
So when we talk about the global semiconductor supply chain, it basically consists of three core streams. Upstream, the IC design; the midstream, the chip making or fabrication, what we call it; and then the downstream, the packaging and testing. Or even in Malaysia, we also call it the assembly. But basically, it's packaging and testing within the downstream. So at this moment, Malaysia excels in this particular downstream, and which is the packaging and testing. But there's a room for us, for Malaysia to grow, because we are not in the advanced packaging and testing, let's say, subsector within this downstream level of packaging and testing.
So early on, you mentioned about how while we are collaborating with other countries in the ASEAN, but we are also at the same time competing with them. Now, there is a lot of talk about regional collaboration. Now, ASEAN aligning its semiconductor goals. How is Malaysia doing enough to stand out and to position itself as a key player in the region? Because we are competing with Singapore, for example?
Yes, it's an excellent question, I believe, because you see, traditionally, you'll have to look at the infrastructure that's already available in the country vis-a-vis the ones that are being invested in, where the plants are still growing and they're, let's say, brand new or whatnot. So we have to look and see how has the infrastructure from the previous generations helped Malaysia to have a competitive edge. So let's say, for example, in Penang, there's a big sector. There's a huge chunk of the companies there are gearing, or they're basically working towards this sector, right? So for any new investments to come, they also have to see what is going to be the differentiator and what kind of aspect they can leapfrog other companies in. So if you look at, take a step back, right? And we look at the fact that not the market, the buyer's market is not in the ASEAN. Most of the chips that are being manufactured are not sold here in the region, right? So they're being exported to, let's say, for example, China, the US, Europe and whatnot. So you have to see what kind of chips are there. Right now, the buzzword is AI chips, NVIDIA, first $4 trillion US company in the world, right? And they were not there 5 years ago. So the industry tends to shift very quickly. So you have to see how well will Malaysia guess where we need to go. So for example, automotive sector. We see now the automotive sector is changing rapidly from US and Europe-based manufacturing to now China. China is now coming up with their own semiconductor industry, right? Where they're having these trade tariffs as something that kind of slows them down, but instead what they're doing is going back and starting to develop their own chips. So now we have to see in 5 to 10 years, do we still have the client base? Are we still selling the chips to the same places? Or do we need to rethink and find a way? And I think during this symposium, they're talking about the fact that we can actually collaborate and create our own markets, domestic markets, and markets that are not necessarily aligned to where it is today, but where it will be. So for example, looking at India, China, Southeast Asia as a market itself, and maybe even position ourselves to go in strongly after that market and not try to compete for what is available or on the market right now. So I think Malaysia is not, well, we have better logistics, that's for sure. I think the fact that we are educated in English most of the time, especially in universities and when it comes to this field specifically, it's better that we have this, but we have to ask ourselves, is that talent staying in Malaysia and taking up Malaysian jobs, or are they then leaving to other countries and then doing the R&D and the research and the chip design and then get it manufactured in Malaysia? So we maybe have Malaysians working on these chip designs, but not for Malaysian companies, not in Malaysia. How do we bring them back? So I think it's a big role for the government to come in and say, look, we have to create the framework. We have to create the ecosystem for SMEs, big corporations, and also the labor sector, even import the labor sector or the educators, the people going to train the next generation and see, look, we're not expecting results in 1 year. This is going to be a long-term plan. And we have advantages that I think are quite unique in the region, and Malaysia has to play to its strengths. So we cannot be cautious. We cannot nibble. We have to bite, and we have to bite hard.
Right. Right. Well, as we speak, the ASEAN Semiconductor Summit is going on at the KL Convention Center, and we will be taking you there right now, as Tengku Zafrul is expected to be making his big speech anytime right now. So we're gonna speak for a little bit more, but at any moment I might have to cut you off, and we need to go to KL Convention Center. But speaking about talent, earlier, KIRILL, you did mention that we need to have a big emphasis on that, and Malaysia's national semiconductor strategy also places a big emphasis on talent. So from your experience in business development and also workforce scaling, are we prepared yet to meet that demand?
Yeah, good question again. The world is changing very rapidly. So if you were to go into a college and say, like, look, in 5 years I want to graduate as a master's degree holder in this particular field, by the time you graduate, the train has already left. You know, there are no more jobs for you. And when you say that there's a hot sector right now, you still have to wait for quite a while before you can produce the workforce that is going to be adjacent with the need. So the demand is there. There's no question of the fact that demand is there, but the supply maybe not always there. Why? From my experience, that we see that the companies can be aggressive. They can come in. They have the right framework. They have the right policies and everything in place. And when they want to hire, there's just not enough people to fill in the gaps that would enable this kind of manufacturing or design or R&D. So we're looking at maybe importing, at least as a short-term strategy, but then you have to have immigration laws that can complement. So for example, you have the MSc status companies that are able to import workforce labor and to kind of smooth out the shortages in the workforce. But eventually we would have to produce our own, and we have to make sure that there's not a brain drain. So when the graduates come in, like we saw with the doctors, for example, if they're being asked for a higher salary in Singapore, what will make them stay? Is it loyalty to the country? Is it, are they part of this bigger picture that we're building Malaysia together for a better future for all of the country, right? Not just like, I'm going to leave for my own sake. So we have to have the long-term strategy and the plan, and we have to have the patience to implement it.